So today our special guest is ColorMetrix Technologies. They'll be talking about color control myths and mysteries. So I will transfer presentation control over to them at this time. So please be patient while we make this switch over.
All right, so we will get started. The title of the presentation is Color Control Myths and Mysteries. My name is Jim Raffel. I'm the CEO of ColorMetrix. Here with me is...
I'm Shelby Sapusik. I'm the project manager at ColorMetrix. So the way that we started thinking about this is we've seen a lot of color confusion in the industry, be it through the way that we measure, the way we look at color. One of the things that Jim and I talk about a lot with our clients and with ourselves in the company is we have very different backgrounds. Jim is what I would term as a color technician. I have 17 years in the newspaper industry. I did a lot of pre-press and press checks. My experience was very different. So we've been going back and forth with what we are calling our color control myths and how it looks between me as a graphic designer in pre-press versus Jim as a color technician.
And before we jump into the first topic, I just wanted to also add what this presentation will not be. Although you'll hear a lot of technical terms like G7, swap, grapple perhaps, ICC profiles, and we'll talk about printing standards, we're not going to dive deep into those. What we really want this to be is a high-level presentation about color and how you can improve your color and obviously your bottom line. So again, it'll be high-level and hopefully point you in the direction of services, products, questions, and education that you want to seek.
So our first myth is a very simple one. You can always trust your eyes. And we're going to highlight these as we go around so you can see where we are in presentation.
In other words, we're going to, this wheel of color confusion, we're going to add some color to it as we go. All right. So our first problem is that the reality is the eye is actually a very, very good comparator of color. There's some concerns with that. One of them is color blindness, and we're not going to get into that too deeply in this presentation, but a certain percentage of the population, predominantly male, is colorblind. So you might think that this in front of you is a colorblind test, when in fact it is not. My real question is, as you look at this slide, do you see the center color or center box of each of these images? Over here on my monitor it looks kind of bluish gray, and on this one it looks yellowish. And you're going to have to trust me on this one because I don't have a comparison, but I can tell you that in fact, because of those surround colors, the yellow over here and the blue over here, those two center boxes are exactly the same color. Now, because you probably don't believe me, what I've got is some very high-end color illusions, which hopefully you guys are all seeing. So this first illusion, what we need to do is we need to look at the box label A and the box label B. And again, as we look at those, at least me, I know the answer, but they look different. And the way that I can tell you that they're not, there's a couple ways. We can take this swatch. We can just drag this swatch. We can put it halfway in between. And you can see that it matches B and it matches A. So again, this is an issue of lighting and the surround. So you've got all gray squares around this one and all white squares around this one, plus you have a shadowing effect from a lighting change. And you can actually turn the mask on, and you can see that clearly those two are the same color. The second illusion is probably something you might print out grayscale tests. And as you look at these, you can see that this is a grayscale. What you probably can't see is that the center circle of every one of those is exactly the same color. So, okay, you don't believe me. Maybe when I drag the mask, let's do it with the swatch. All exactly the same color. So while the eye is a great comparator of color, it can also be fooled. Our third illusion is very similar to the first one that I had on my slide. I actually like this one a little bit more. The same general illusion. We're looking at the connector in the middle of this toy. And here again, for me it looks purple, and here it looks yellow. But if I drag the mask down, they're actually both gray. And what's happening is the grays, your eye is being fooled by the surround colors again. All right, so let's go back to our actual PowerPoint. So that states the problem. And we solutions for that?
When I was in the newspaper industry, I had to use side-by-side visual references. I had to take an actual proof and an actual print, lay them down, and look at it under certain lighting and hope and pray that my eyes were telling me the truth and that this was the actual correct color. But since I've been working the last couple of years with ColorMetrix, there are a lot more sophisticated ways to determine, measure accurate color. Obviously, one of the ones used in the industry most often is instrumentation or spectrophotometers.
All right, so we've got a couple solutions there. You can, again, use side-by-side comparison, so you get rid of that surround issue and also make sure you're in consistent lighting, or you can use an instrument. Both of those solutions offer an assist to your eye. It's still your eye at the end of the day because we're selling color to people, not to color or to color measuring instruments. But it removes some of the subjectivity of Shelby and I looking at colors maybe in different places with different lighting, with different surround effect. We can eliminate some of that so it's no longer subjective and becomes more objective.
So again, this isn't quite a wide format printing example that I have, but when I was in charge of press checks at a newspaper, we had I guess a navy blue masthead that had to be right all the time, and of course that was on our front page. Well, our front page always printed alongside our back page, and the advertising department came to me one day and they were all excited. They sold a full page ad on the back cover and it was purple. And my printer came to me and said they could never print it because they couldn't match the masthead, which couldn't change, or the brand color of this advertiser. So I was having client rejections and a lot of frustrations with my printer because they couldn't match the proofs that I had.
How did you solve that?
So honestly, the way that I think the rest of these myths are going to go, there is really no right answer because there are just too many variables when it comes to color. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and you have to be able to look at all those different variables and try to determine what it is that needs to change to get your representative color.
All right. And the benefit is that ultimately, if you go through some of the things that we've already covered and the things that we're going to continue to cover, you'll produce prints that will meet your customers' expectations. And the actual benefit to you, in addition to having a happy customer, is you'll have few or no redos and little or no waste. So it means that you'll have more productive time on your equipment, and potentially this can all drop down to your bottom.
So our next myth, the third one there in yellow, is swatchbook colors are easily reproduced. I'm sure everybody's seen the Pantone swatchbook, for instance.
Yes, and there's nothing wrong with the Pantone swatchbook. It's just that and it doesn't have to be Pantone, there's other versions. Any swatchbook can only be printed on maybe one or two different substrates. In the case of Pantone, it's printed with offset inks, and in fact, you're not using offset inks. You're using in inkjet, you're using probably some pigments, some dye base. You may be doing, UV curing or not. So there's all kinds of different variables that aren't taken into account with an actual swatchbook. So it's not only potentially not produced on the correct media or substrate, it's probably not produced with the correct inks on top of that.
One solution that we have figured out in working ColorMetrix is for instance, we have a packaging company that we work with. And what we did is we actually traveled out there and we took some of their drawdowns, which are some of the swatches you see in that image, and what we called measure parties. We sat in a conference room, and there was probably 4 or 5 of us, and we had 3 or 4 different instruments or spectrophotometers, and we measured them on the same spot on each of those swatches that you see there, and we went around the table, and it was all done in the same environment with the same lighting at the same time.
And okay, so I want to add to that one of the other things you can do is you can create essentially your own swatchbook. So you can get some kind of a template, and they're available, that will allow you to print out the spot colors that you need to print out on your printer with the appropriate media, with the appropriate inks. And then you can not only measure those, which is part of the equation, but you can also have those swatches available, and you can print potentially multiple of those swatch books and measure them to make sure that they're all producing the same. You can then share those swatch books with your clients and say, look, I know your ink swatch book that you have says this is a a color 487. But with our printer, you can see that 487 really, what you call 487 is really 485. So we're going to, in our RIP, we're basically going to say that anytime you specify 485 or 487, we're going to actually replace it with 485, and that way we can match your brand color consistently.
And if you're able to achieve that, basically what the benefit is, you're going to get the representation of your color and not just the idea of it.
Exactly. So we will move on to our fourth myth. So we talked about substrate, and I think we've already kind of alluded to the fact that substrate has little effect on the color, because that's a myth. So what we're going to do is talk about how substrate does, in fact, affect the outcome of your color.
I know this might be a little hard to read, but we have in our possession what we call a color quiz. And as you can see in that question mark there, you're going to see what appears to be a lot of different color of reds. And it says, which stocks are printed with the same ink?
Are you ready?
Go ahead.
I'd love to have people type answers as questions, but that's okay. I know we get a lot of different answers.
Well, the answer is all of them. They're all different substrates, but the same ink all the way through.
Right. So that defines the problem. And that is that sometimes your brand color needs to be matched on two different medias, and it may also need to be matched with two different inks, thinking back to some previous points that we've covered. And that also sometimes, and I'm sure this has never happened to anyone in the audience, you switch rolls of media during production, and all of a sudden what was an acceptable color match becomes a not acceptable color match. And I actually, just to elaborate on that a little bit, think about in-store displays. Oftentimes you have to match a flexo printed package that might be going into a corrugated stand-up display in the store, and maybe you're printing that corrugated display, maybe you're printing the pop-up sign that goes next to it, but all of those, printed by different processes on different medias, have the same brand color that has to be matched, and that the brand owner is very adamant match across all of the different medias. Now, there's actually a fairly easy solution, not necessarily easy to implement, but it's all there, all the technology exists. The first thing you need to do is you need to track your media and either measure it ultimately, or maybe in the beginning just visually assess your current roll of media to the new roll of media. So as you're changing out media, tear off a piece of the old roll, tear off a piece of the new roll, and go to the best lighting you have in your facility. And if you don't have a light booth, which I know many of you probably don't, take it outside. Daylight is your best comparator of color, and make sure that those two medias match visually if you're running a job across the rolls. And then the next step would be to learn how to calibrate your printer using a gray balance adjustment method, something like a G7 method, which you may or may not have heard of. There's an organization called Ideal Alliance, and they have a method called G7. All it does is it takes your printer and it moves it into gray balance. And once a printer's in gray balance, it's much easier to swap out medias, because you'll establish essentially gray points in what we call profiles, which can be driven by your RIP. Your RIP can have multiple profiles, and you'll know which gray balance, based on the media, to run your profile to. So you can, in theory, match the same brand color across multiple medias.
And obviously the benefit of being able to deal with this myth is you're not going to be rejected for color, which means you're going to have less waste, which is going to cost you less money. You're also going to, see the gray balance calibration adjust for the white points too.
And again, it's a matter of that white point shift. Every media has a slightly different white point. Some are not slightly different, and I'm sure you've all experienced that just laying medias out and comparing them. So it's adjusting for that white point, because typically the inks in your printer are the same unless you have multiple types of ink, pigment versus dye. But typically the inks are going to be the same, and it's more of a white point shift in your media that's going to be giving you a problem. So our next myth is what you see on the screen, you'll see in print. And I'm sure that no one has this problem, right? I mean, everything you see on the screen, you always see in print. And Shelby, that was your experience too in newspaper, right?
Well, yeah, in newspaper, we just went with what we had on the screen. If I really wanted to match a color, it would, or I wanted to come up with a specific color, it would be printing out 17 tints of one color, sending it to my printer, having them print it, and they were several hours away, so it wasn't like I could actually go there. And they would send it back, and then I'd choose what to use from there. I would never, ever trust my monitor. And part of that is one of the solutions that Jim's going to mention is they didn't believe in actually calibrating monitors for color.
Really?
No.
Okay.
At least it wasn't top of mind or anything that they did on a regular basis.
No, and that's really not surprising based on my experience. So this solution is actually a little more in-depth. I've actually got 4 bullet points here, and I'm going to take a few minutes and stay on this slide, so I hope people don't get bored with the slide not changing, but I think what we have to say is important. Shelby started with monitor calibration, and there's different types of monitors, there's different types of monitor calibrations, and there's different price points for these things. But the reality is, if you want what you see on your monitor to match what comes off of your printer, then you have to do some form of monitor calibration, A, and B, you have to buy a monitor that is probably not attainable at a big box discount store. You're going to need to spend more money for a higher quality monitor. An Apple Cinema display, kind of at the low end of that, believe it or not, and something you can go much higher end at $2,500 to $5,000. That's if you really truly want what you see on your monitor to match what's coming off of your printer. So some of those are financial decisions that have to be made. You also have to be willing to do some form of printer calibration. Again, something like the G7 gray balance is one method. It's not the only one. And that both of those steps above, monitor calibration and printer calibration, require you to own or have access to measuring instruments typically called spectrophotometers. Those instruments are capable of measuring the monitor, measuring what's coming off the printer, and then using some software tools, essentially moving the color of those devices together. And one has to come towards the other, and you find a common area where the color gamuts of the two overlap, and you basically then have some confidence that actually a high degree of confidence that what you're seeing on your monitor, you're capable of producing on your printer. And then the last thing that really Shelby added to this is that once you've done that, you can create a palette of colors that you can use in your design applications, right?
Yes, honestly, though, in my experience, like I said, I didn't have monitor calibration at top of mind. We certainly didn't have instrumentation. So creating a color palette and just doing test prints and then picking that to, picking things to be my color. I mean, if you can't do anything else, if you're able to work with your printer very closely, you can come up with a palette that will be at least close to being accurate every time.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood that. This is the one, kind of the poor man's solution, for lack of a better way to describe it.
Newspapers are poor these days.
Well, and it's also a relatively easy way to do it. You print out a palette of critical colors, and you can basically then make some adjustments to your monitor. This isn't an ideal solution because you have to go back and redo it, but again, it's essentially a way of visually saying, okay, this color that I just printed out looks like the one on my monitor. Okay, I guess I forgot about that.
So obviously the benefit is if you go through some of these or a combination of the solutions that we gave, you'll be able to actually look at your screen, trust that those colors that you see on your screen are actually going to match when you see the printed proof.
Excellent. And that's what everyone wants. They want color that matches.
Exactly. So this is an interesting one. I'm sure everybody's had light booths if you've been checking proofs at all, but prints look the same in all lighting conditions.
And this one is kind of a personal favorite of mine.
Of course, there are charts.
Shelby's right. We have some graphs. But what the graphs are really showing here is that no, in fact, well, let's leave the graphs for a moment. Let's look at this image at the bottom. You can see this is kind of what we did with our optical illusions at the beginning. If you look at obviously you can see the flesh tones are clearly varying, between these three images, but also that gray circle is varying, just like that same optical illusion. What's causing this change in color is not an optical illusion. It's a change in lighting. So this particular light booth is capable of displaying three different illuminants or light sources. The far left one is commercial fluorescent lighting. So this is how this image appears in commercial fluorescent lighting. The middle one is what I talked about before, daylight. So if you were to take your prints actually outside, preferably actually on an overcast day, believe it or not, you would get something that looks like this. So again, there's clearly some difference. But here's the real kicker. What if someone takes this home in what is incandescent lighting, which is ultimately going away with some change in legislation, but hasn't gone away yet? You can see how much warmer it gets. And the reason is, in fact, the graphs. Just think of the rainbow, Roy G. Biv, red, green, orange, indigo, violet, whatever, I don't know how to border. Essentially, what this is showing you is how each of these light sources spreads light across the visual spectrum, like looking at a rainbow. And you can see that clearly, you know, this one peaks in different places, the fluorescent, then the daylight, and of course incandescent peaks all out here in what is red, which is why it's so warm. All right, so that's the problem.
Well, obviously the solution would be just to test your ink and media under different light sources. Having a light box, if you're doing advertising printing or wide format printing or packaging especially, I think is important. Since we've been working so much with packaging, I think it's really important because so often these are being printed in lower light conditions, and where are they going to end up? A lot of times on really bright lighted grocery store floors where things are going to look very, very different.
And so what the device on this slide allows you to do is it's similar to the other one, but it has actually 4 different light sources, the new device that's out. And it allows you to slide the same ink swatches under 4 different illuminants. So you could print, if you print a big enough block on your printer, you can just slide it under, and you can see really quickly which ones are going to work under which light sources. And again, this is a matter of mixing your different printing capabilities, so whatever different inks, and also your different substrates, and trying those under a device like this. And you may not have to own this. You might be able to borrow one. One of your suppliers might have one available, because this is kind of a one-time thing to go through a process and figure out what ink and media combinations under multiple light sources work the best. And then, of course, understanding, here's the key, understanding the limitations, which ones don't work, and then working with your customers to say, look, I know you want it on this media, but then you have to understand, and you can show them an example like this, you have to understand that it's not going to match in all light sources no matter what we do. It's just a limitation of the technology.
You know, we haven't talked about this for a while, Jim, but this one doesn't really have a lot to do with lighting, but just in general, we work a lot with packaging, and how important brand colors are to them when we go through this. And it reminds me a couple years ago when Coke did that different can for regular Coke during the holiday season. They had a white can with a polar bear, and everybody got confused because they thought it was Diet Coke, and they ended up having to pull it from the shelves because people were complaining so much. But I thought that was a really interesting example of how important brand color can be.
Right. You think people thought that Coke was Diet Coke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
I still have one of those cans. Nice. Okay, I'm sorry. Near you. Me. Okay.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Was it me?
Yeah.
All right, get that lost back. Basically, we've already said this. You and your customers will understand the limitations of the ink and substrate combinations, and then the key is then to help them avoid the problem combinations.
So our 7th myth is that reprints will always match the original production run.
Absolutely, right? That's always been my experience.
Right.
Okay, maybe not.
Right. This is a little story which is kind of true. We made this for a trade show for a client, and we were trying to, this was a poster board size, but we would use it in our demonstrations. And what we were trying to show was if you had either a car wrap panel or a trade show booth panel, and let's say you piece it all together and it works perfectly, but then on the way back home it gets damaged somehow. So you either have 2 choices. You can reprint all of the panels or reprint one of them and hope they match. Well, 6 months ago when you set out to make this trade show booth, you had certain conditions in your printing facility, and then now that you want to reprint it, if you can tell that the three on the left are different,
Actually,
darker.
these two are different from each other. So
Yep.
this upper left was a reprint,
Yep.
and you can see how the gray got much darker. And then actually down here,
Those
it's
two.
the middle one.
Middle one?
The middle one's the reprint. So you can see it was a nice bright red, and
Yep.
just like this went dark, the car went dark, and we lost all the detail and the shadow of the car. And clearly, if that was someone's trade show booth or car wrap, and you redid these two panels, they would not be satisfied.
I already talked about the problem here, but
Okay, yeah, you did. That's fine. We don't need to restate. Well, maybe that last thing, though. You end up reprinting the entire job to satisfy the customer instead of just reprinting two panels. And honestly, nobody's satisfied at that point because it takes longer. They have to rebuild, more of the trade show booth. You have to rewrap their entire car, and nobody's a winner in that scenario.
and in most often the reprint is still not going to look the same as the original. It's just all going to at least look the same, the pieces of it.
Exactly. So really what we do here with our solution to MIT7 is we tie this whole thing together. And the solution to really overcoming all of these myths is to begin some form of a color measurement and process control system. Because really before you can do any of the really important work, which is the G7 calibration, the ICC creation of ICC profiles, monitoring your media, all of those things, you really need to have a process control solution in place first. And that's really typically going to include your instrumentation like your spectrophotometers so that you can measure at different points along the production cycle, and then some form of software to capture that information. You can start with something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet and hand key the numbers from the instrument into the spreadsheet. Many people do that. You can even write them on a legal pad as a starting point. But ultimately, you may want to invest in some software, which is probably why we're doing this webinar. That's what we do. If you have any questions about that as we move on.
And we say this over and over again, but our goal, and I think throughout the print industry, their goal is to eliminate some of these extra costs that you get through customer rejections or print redos. We tell people all the time, go out, you don't want to go out and invest in a $1,000 measuring instrument, but think about the thousands of dollars that end up on your floor that go nowhere because you have to redo and reprint all the time.
Correct. Absolutely. All right, so here's kind of this is the post-test for everybody. Hopefully you've learned some things. And we've got two great, I guess I'm going to call them chiclets because that's the only thing I can think of.
They do look like chiclets.
They do. Are they the same? That's our question. So is the top where the arrow is pointing and the bottom where the arrow is pointing, are those in fact the same color? And I know this audience has been paying very, very close attention and probably already knows that the answer is in fact yes, they are. All right, so we did about what we wanted to here. We took about 30 minutes to get through the canned portion of the presentation. And I've been noticing, Dana, that there's been a number of questions. Did you want to field those to us, or do you want me to go through and see if we can answer those?
The question that I couldn't get to was from Brent. He asks, are IPS panel monitors needed for good color matching, or will TN panels be okay?
Oh, okay. He's talking about those are obviously brands of computer monitors, correct? I'm assuming. And honestly, at least I think that's what that is. And if that's in fact the case, I am actually not familiar with either of those brands. My experience is that really, if you want to have accurate on-screen color, you need to start with something like an Apple Cinema display. Anything below that, there are some known limitations. I'm not saying you can't go below that. We've done testing with others, but really below a Cinema display, it's going to be hit or miss. And if you know what you're doing and you're willing to go through some testing, you can clearly save some money. What you may find is that you have to buy 3 or 4 of the same brand of monitor and test them all and figure out which ones are closest to each other if you want to have 1 or 2 that match each other. And
yes,
one that
please give your designers and your press people, your pre-press people, the same monitors. That's very helpful.
It is. It is.
We have some clarification from Brent with some help from Yannick. These are not brands. IPS is a technology. So IPS panels have a much wider gamut than TN panels.
All right,
Okay.
I see what he's talking about now. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that question. My knowledge is more in brands that work versus brands that don't. And again, Cinema Display I know works. I believe a company called ISO or EZO, I usually mispronounce it, has several different monitors that work. And then there's a new player. There's a new player who's come up with some monitors, the name of which is escaping me now. Those are the three that, at least in my experience in the graphic arts industry, are most common for accurate monitor color.
Yeah, I've seen NEC, and I'm also familiar with AZO. It's EIZO. They make very expensive monitors.
NEC is a little less expensive, and in some of the testing I've seen, almost as good. So.
I think just because my brothers like video games a lot, I know that TN panels are usually used in the gaming industry. I don't know if they're, because they're like, I think they're 5 or 6 panels. I have not seen one in a really long time. But I don't know that they're used in the print industry all that often.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with the ability of inks to match a screen color gamut. So if that helps at all, Brent, a good question. Thank you. We also have some questions here regarding light temperature and what's best to design with. Brent asked if 6500 Kelvin is the best, and Javier simply wants to know what light source is recommended.
All right, let me go back to that slide. So there is no right answer. I come from more of the traditional graphic arts industry. Think offset printing, magazine printing. And for years and years and years, we as an industry have said that what's called daylight or D50 is the right light source. But we've always had the exact same problem that you see here. Think about a magazine. They're buying their Cosmo magazine in the grocery store at the checkout, which has lighting like this, cool white. Whoops. And we printed for this, and then they take it home and they look at it in their incandescent light source. So the real answer is that most people in their office go for daylight, which some people say it's 6500, some people say it's 5000. My answer is I'd pick one and make sure that you do it consistently, and really invest in at least one light booth, and it doesn't even have to necessarily be a big one. It could be a tabletop one, and if you put it in the right room, with the right illumination, you can at least check color in a consistent, because it's all about consistency. So you can always check color in a consistent environment, so that you can know that what you did a week ago and you do this week, it's the same color controlled environment. I know people have taken it to the extreme, and they buy the certified D50 bulbs from the light booth manufacturers, and they put them in every fixture in their entire building. They paint the walls in every room Munsell gray, and pretty much what happens is their entire facility becomes a light booth, and then they still have light booths that they look at critical color in. So there's kinds of extremes, and there's getting started. But the most important part is to understand where the product's going to be used. If it's going to be used and purchased in fluorescent store lighting, then you at least want to have the capability to look at it that way.
This might sound simple, too, but to try to keep at least a regulated light source, consider where your actual creatives and pre-press people are sitting in the office. Are they near, they don't need to be near a window where the light's going to be changing all the time. We also had hoods that were built on top of our monitors to kind of keep some of that background lighting off.
Damien, you think we answered both questions there?
I think so, yeah. I mean, for the benefit of the Roland users that are outputting through our VersaWorks RIP, all of our profiles that we include in VersaWorks were profiled at 5000 Kelvin because we expect our prints to be seen outside.
Perfect.
That's a helpful reference for the Roland owners.
That's true. Yeah, you're doing a lot of outdoor graphics, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like that's the extent of the lighting questions we have here, and then we have an interesting discussion of monitors and monitor technology.
I was kind of looking at that. I wish I had more knowledge on the monitors.
Well, I think light source helps when you're talking about neutral gray. Yannick just asked a question. Lighting can be so confusing. In my print room, if the gray comes out of the printer perfect, it will look greenish outside. So when I'm printing neutral gray for vehicles, it might look pinkish inside to be right outside. Yeah, that's precisely why we talk about light source.
Yep, that's exactly the slide we have up again shows exactly what happens. So he's printing inside. Where's my mouse? He's printing inside, so this is what he's seeing. He's probably well, actually, I don't know what he's doing inside. Maybe he's got incandescent in his shop, so he's seeing a gray that looks good here, and then he takes it outside, which is here, and all of a sudden it shifts on. Now, depending, there's a simple solution. I always say the inexpensive, quick solution is to take your test prints and evaluate them outside. I mean, most of us, the door's not too far away, so hopefully it's not raining. And actually, we prefer an overcast day. Again, as I said, that's actually the best day to. Because the D50 light standard is essentially a neutral gray overcast day in Rochester, New York on I think it's April or May.
I used to laugh when my photographers would tell me that it's too sunny to go outside and take pictures, but it's true.
So our next question from Javier is, what do you recommend when color matching specified Pantone colors supplied by a customer?
Okay, that's actually I don't mind answering that one. That's a good one. Let me see what back is that one, Shelby.
You going to the splash book?
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, so this is actually, again, I think this one's a fairly easy solution. You need to have a Pantone book or have the client bring in the Pantone book that they're using. And again, you need to, on the printer that you're going to output the work on, unless you're doing everything we've said in here, unless you've created a color-controlled work environment. The quick solution is to print out test swatches approximately close to that color. So go into your RIP and say, grab the Pantone book and look at the swatches, 5 either side of that, and print out all 10 of those, and bring it out to your customer, and hopefully have a light booth or walk outside and say, okay, here's the swatch you brought me that you want to match, and I know you want Pantone 485, but again, on my printer right now it's Pantone 487. So are you okay with me printing this color to be your 485? And again, it's truly not a fault in the Pantone system. It's a limitation. It's a known limitation. The Pantone book is created with offset inks on a coated and a matte stock, and that's it. And you're not printing offset, and you're probably not printing on the same coated or offset or coated or matte stock that they are printing on.
Okay, for the benefit of the Roland owners out there using VersaWorks, there is a reference chart for which Pantone colors can get close with EcoSol Max ink and which ones are very decidedly out of gamut. And then there is a suggested delta E reference warning for how far out of gamut that color is. We addressed that with 2 webinars back in December, and they're located in our recorded archive.
Oh, perfect. There you go. Yeah, I know many, and I don't want to speak to that. I know many RIPs do have essentially spot color replacement libraries, which it sounds like that's sort of what they're doing. They're saying if it's
right, that's exactly what it is. If you design with Pantone 186, for example, the RIP will be able to tell based on the substrate you've chosen with the ICC target whether or not that red will be within a certain delta E. And I think the going standard right now is the human eye can detect over 5 delta E.
Right, and it depends. That depends somewhat on the color, but that's a very good starting point.
Nick says he likes to threaten his clients until they become less particular with their color. That also works.
That's awesome.
All right, I saw one down here. Someone says the Pantone Color Bridge book helps showing a customer what it will look like. But again, even then, I think printing something on your printer is a great solution, especially if it's a key customer and just a few critical brand colors. It doesn't hurt to have start to build your own color library for that customer because you're kind of showing them that you care. Any more questions? I don't see any that we missed. Dana, do you?
No, we haven't missed any questions yet, but if there are any more from the audience, we're starting to wrap up on our time here. Larry asks, I'm trying to get color controlled in my shop. I write my own profiles using the X-Rite i1 Pro. Once set up initially, how do I check and adjust this on a frequent basis without going through the whole process again, such as daily gray balance checks?
That is, I absolutely love that question. That's our business. Essentially, what you need to do is print some kind of control strip on probably a daily basis. Honestly, is enough in the beginning, unless you're going to run a critical color job. You might want to do it more frequently. And what's on that color control strip is a whole other webinar, which we actually did. We did that back in October, I think, for you guys. And what that allows you to do is on a daily basis, just run a small test print, measure it with you've already got the right instrument, the I1. You measure it with your I1, and it essentially gives you a pass or fail. So it tells you if your printer, and you should print this test strip through your RIP, it tells you if the combination of your media, your printer, your inks, your RIP, everything are all still consistent. And again, you set a delta E tolerance, and Dana and I has already given you a good one, 5. You basically say, as long as these 54 colors on this control strip match within 5 delta E, we're good to keep running. And of course, the other thing that the software does is it has trend lines in it, so you can start to see if you're drifting closer and closer to 5 delta E, you may want to take the time to do that gray point adjustment, gray balance adjustment before you go out of tolerance and over 5 delta E. And that way you can do it at a production lull instead of, when do these things usually happen? You're slammed busy and you don't have any extra time. Hopefully that answers your question. I think that was Larry, right?
Yes, I also have the link to the previous one, which we did on proofpass.com.
Okay.
So we can show that before we wrap up today, and I also have the location of where our recorded archive is.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Brent asks, what tool would be used to match backlit material with non-backlit material? That's an interesting one.
Yeah, that one gets a little trickier. I'm actually not an expert in that area, but it's the problem with backlit is if you measure it with the same instrument, if you measure it backlit with the same instrument that you're measuring your reflective piece with, non-backlit, you're going to fool the instrument. So I would actually request that maybe Brent emails me, and I have someone I can ask that question. I know an expert. I will ask the question and see if there is an easy solution. That's not one I've had to address, though. And I'd rather get him the right answer than shoot from the hip. See who's next here.
Alex says we have a problem with VersaWorks where printing beige or light tan almost always comes out with a green cast. This happens with Spot, CMYK, RGB, which display beige on the monitor, and others, even including process values from the Pantone Color Bridge book. Without getting into the details of how the actual specific workflow is done in your shop, Alex, I was wondering if maybe monitor calibration is affecting that, or perhaps the lighting in the room. But I think that may go back to the light that you're designing under or the light that the profile was built with.
Yeah, okay. I'm just reading it one more time here. Yeah, I almost wonder if the gray alignment process that he's using, and I don't know how VersaWorks does that, the gray point calibration, I'm wondering if it's not working quite right almost. I don't know if he's doing visual assessments or measured assessments. That's the big thing here. Again, I apologize, I don't have specific knowledge of VersaWorks.
No, it's okay. It may be a question that you might want to take up with our tech team, Alex. So if you want to give our technical support team a call, they may be able to ask you some more qualifying questions and get some more specific tailored help that probably can't be addressed in a forum such as this. We have a question from Mirna. We have a terrible time producing grays and yellows. They either have a green or pink cast to them. Suggestions. several color tests to try to match. Again, with yellows, I think that might be easier done with using primary colors in VersaWorks. We have some webinars that address that. But in terms of grays, again, that green or pink cast has a lot to do with lighting source.
Right. Exactly what they're seeing. I agree. The way it appears, it probably has something to do with the lighting under which you're evaluating. And then obviously you need to decide which lighting you're using. And I've honestly been in print shops where a lot of windows. So a sunny day, an overcast day, it's going to affect your gray balance. That really goes back to lighting. You need to make sure you have solid lighting first before you start. I'd use the term finger pointing, but that's not really what we're doing. But you see, it's kind of a problem-solving method. And the first thing you got to do is make sure you have consistent lighting. Second thing you need to do is make sure you have consistent printing, which is the process control piece. And then you can start tackling these problems with more knowledge. So instead of kind of shooting in the dark for a solution, you can find solutions that are permanent and work over a long period of time.
Tony asks about a step-by-step instruction for the printed gray balance. That might include proofpass.com, but it may be something a little bit more tailored to his unique workflow.
Yeah, and again, some of this depends on what tools you're using. But the G7 methodology, for example, is available. You can download the how-to guide. At least you used to be able to. You can download the how-to guide and all of the graph paper if you want to do it the manual longhand way, and targets that you have to print. And as long as you have an instrument, you can basically do this whole thing manually. And that's Idea Alliance, right? Yeah, ideaalliance.org, which we can get that link up probably at the end too. I'm pretty sure that they still allow free download of all the tools. And that's one way. I mean, then there's software packages out there that, some cost $1,200, some cost $10,000 to do gray balance and ICC profiling and all of that.
Okay, do we have any more questions for our panelists? Okay, while we wrap things up, I have a few items that I'd like to share with you before we close down the webinar. So I'll take presentation control back just for now. And we'll take a look at some of the tools and options we have available for you. What you have on the screen in front of you is our store. The website is rolanddgastore.com. We sell two X-Rite packages. One is a basic and one is a Publish Pro. One of them has the capability of profiling and one does not. But the I1 itself does come in both packages. So if you decide to go with ProofPass, which is a ColorMetrix product, this will work with the I1. The next thing I'll show you is our online webinar series page where you registered for today's webinar. The link up here in the upper right, which is the View Webinar Archive, for those of you that own a Roland, you can input your machine and serial number and you'll get access to all of our recorded webinars. For you that don't yet own a Roland, you can check out all of our recorded partner webinars on our YouTube account, which is Roland DGA Support. And you'll see right here I have proofpass.com by ColorMetrix Technologies. Today's webinar will also be posted here as well so that you can view it afterwards. The last thing is the ideaalliance.org website that was mentioned. It's Idea Alliance, and those two words are truncated to be one, and it's .org.
And then just search for downloads once they're there.
So if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank ColorMetrix Technologies for their broadcast today. Jim and Shelby, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Today's webinar will be available at rolanddga.com/webinars in the archive, as well as on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/RolandDGA-support. Jim and Shelby, do you have any contact information that you'd like to put up on the screen?
I actually didn't do that, but why don't I at least speak it very quickly?
Okay.
The easiest way to find us is at ColorMetrix.com, and that is actually at the first slide. So, no, actually, we don't have it anywhere. It's at the bottom right here. ColorMetrix, ColorMetrix.com. From there, you can find us and our products.
Okay, COLR.
Oh, I see. Maybe I can show. Yeah, sorry. I'll just show it again. It's right down here.
Okay, so as you can see on your screen, ColorMetrix.com, ColorMetrix Technologies LLC. This is their website. There's a phone number listed on the screen as well. And again, this webinar will be processed today, and hopefully we'll have it up on the web by tonight or tomorrow at the first opportunity we have.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Shelby.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.